lovely people. This week I have a sort of review, sort of just thoughts for you.
Sophie Vlogs.
Essentially, I recently read Son of a Witch by Gregory Maguire, which is the second book in the Wicked series, and I still don't know how I feel about it, so I thought if I did like a little thought dump, and then I could get other people's opinions on it, and it might help me muddle out. My essential point is that I keep returning to with this series is there are aspects of this series which I really enjoy, and then there are aspects about it which I don't really enjoy, and it leaves me really muddled and conflicted because I read Wicked probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, and I read it because I like the musical. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what the original book is like? I knew they were quite different. And there were aspects of it I really liked, and then there were aspects of it which left me wanting more. And so initially I didn't plan on continuing this series because I was like, oh, it didn't really work for me, I won't continue it. But Wicked has turned into one of those books which has stayed with me and which my mind returns to sometimes and wonders about. So when I saw this in a second-hand bookshop, I thought, let's give it a go. Let's see if maybe the second book, like, I was wondering if maybe some of the things that left me dissatisfied with Wicked, would they be aspects that were explored in this book? What's actually happened is I've had a very similar experience, but with different reasons. So, this is going to be mildly spoilery, so if you don't want to know anything about this series, you probably don't want to watch this video. If you don't mind hearing some thoughts on something, then let's carry on. So, as you probably know, this picks up the story that Wicked ends with the death of Elphaba. This picks up with looking at her maybe son, maybe not son, Lear, and his journey and what happens to him. One of the things I struggled with initially is that this just takes a while. The pacing of this seemed really inconsistent sometimes because there were moments where, because the book starts with Lear has been found by these Maunts, and they're like nursing him back to life, all of his bones are broken, they don't know what's happened to him, so there's like contemporary plotline that's like that, and then it's flashing back and it's showing you Liz, what's happened to Liz. So like him leaving with Dorothy, stuff like that, going to the Emerald City, all of these things that have happened in his life. What I felt like is that because we're like flashing to and fro, sometimes I'd get invested in a plot line and then we'd like get away from it, and other times it just felt like we were taking a really long time to like get places. And then building on that is a lot of this is to do with Lear just doesn't know who he is. Quite literally, he doesn't know his parentage. He doesn't know who he is as a person. He feels very ill-defined, and I wonder if part of what this narrative is doing is that sometimes it felt a bit going off topic, having these rambles and stuff like this, and I wonder if partly that is just reflective of our main character and who they are. Like, Elphaba was such a... Elphaba knew who she was, which Lear doesn't, and so this might be more rambly because it's reflecting who we're now focused on. So, like, that's something I'm still sort of muddling out. Do I think that that was done well enough? Do I still think it should have been tightened? I think maybe I'm leaning towards the latter there. One thing I did like about it that is related to Lear finding himself is there were these moments and these passages which were exploring, like, what makes you? Like, when he has all these interactions with the Conference of Birds, and they're like, you fly, you're a bird, and he's like, no, I'm not. And there's these discussions of, like, what makes you who you are, and your nature, and all these things. There were, every now and then, there were moments in this, there were, like, passages, and I was like, ooh, that's effective, ooh, I connect to that. And then that made me, like, yes, drop back in, and then you'd have these like slow moments, and I'd be like, oh, am I enjoying this? That sort of thing. One thing I maintain about this series that I really like is I think this whole political atmosphere that's being built up is really interesting and really effective. I think it's a really good dystopian way of exploring how do the people in power exercise control, like especially there's like a couple of moments which felt quite 1989 with how like the newspaper's been rebranded as like the Ministry of, like, I don't know if it is the Ministry of Truth, that is like a 1984 thing, but like these like the shifts in Ozian society that show you the increasing power that like is coming down, and just because the wizard is no longer in charge does not mean things have got any better. And like, let's discuss and contrast Glinda's time in power versus like Shen's time in power and stuff. So these showing different ways that people can try and rule, but also at the same time none of them are really doing a good job. And the persecution of animals, like, as a topic, discuss. So I think that there's, and this, in the Conference of Birds, this discussion that, like, the birds have held themselves separate because they could, but now, this is so relevant, just because something is happening to a different group that is not you, you think that you can separate yourself from it, but actually, all that happens is those people get exterminated, and then you're next, and then there's no one to help you because they're all gone because you didn't help them. So there are these really interesting, worthwhile political discussions going on, and that's something that I really like about this series. It's just you have all of that, and then you go through periods of the text which seem to be focused on, like, nothing much, and that's like a conflict that I find with my reading. Another thing which I really liked about this series, which is a huge spoiler, is I don't really like love triangles that are like person A is at the centre and then person B and person C like really like person A but hate each other. I like love triangles which are like all of these people are connected and they love each other. So I'm really intrigued by this Leah Trism candle thing that's building, and that's something that actually does make me really want to read the third book in the series. It's nice to have some like explicit queerness be brought into this Wizard of Oz retelling sort of world. I think that's really great. So that's something that I really enjoy that makes me want to continue. I just don't know if is the third book also similarly got a weird pacing, blah blah blah. So like, I guess my rallying point is, if you're watching this and wherever you're at with the series, how has your experience of reading the series been? Have you had some of the similar complaints? Did they not bother you? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that. Like, what do you like? What do you not like about it? If you have continued with the series, how does the pacing go? Does the pacing get a bit better? Are these things which is just like part of Gregory Maguire's writing? Because I haven't read anything else by him. Like, is that just traditional of him? You've just got to embrace it and go with it. All of this and more, I find myself having lots to think about with this series, some positive, some negative, but I am really glad I read this because it has reminded me of all the things I liked about Wicked. I just am now conflicted about, do I continue the series, bearing in mind there is so much to read in the world ever? Is this worthwhile? I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts. That's about it from me for this week. Do let me know anything you want in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you next week with something different.